733, Path to War. After the lecture last time, I got in my car and got to thinking. I blamed Mussolini for Italy's seeming ineptness in the war, but then I got to thinking it over. Was it all Mussolini's fault, or was it partly the fault of the Italian people? With all fairness, I mean, again, I don't know if any of you are Italian or not, but the Italians have generally not been as industrious or as known to be as productive as Germans. You know, if Hitler had ruled over Italy, would Hitler have been a Mussolini? And if Mussolini had ruled over Germany, would Mussolini have been a Hitler? How much did the people make the man, and how much did the man make the people? Somehow, I don't believe that Mussolini would have been a Hitler. He just wasn't quite as evil as Adolf Hitler was. Even though I don't know what he'd have been if he ruled over Germany, but as for how putting Hitler ruling over Italy, somehow I don't see that as a good matchup either. Hitler was too energetic and too driving, and the people would have rebelled against him sooner than he rebelled against Mussolini. And it's what I'm guessing. You know, it's just one of those, what one of my graduate professors called a good intellectual exercise. What could have been, what might have been. Hi. Path to War. We'll start off with Europe, even though the war really did not begin in Europe. Japan, as we're going to see in a few minutes, was already fighting the war before it started in Europe. Nevertheless, the book starts out in Europe, so we'll start there too. In 1936 or thereabouts, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a member of the League of Nations, and Ethiopia appealed to the League for help. The League of Nations did absolutely nothing. Now, Italy had tried to conquer Ethiopia back in the 1890s, and Ethiopia whipped them. But in the 1930s, Italy had airplanes and tanks that Ethiopia did not have, and Ethiopia fell before the Italian onslaught. Now, when the war was over, of course, Italy had to give Ethiopia back. In the meantime, Japan invaded Manchuria. And took Manchuria from China. Manchuria is part of the northeast corner of China, as some of you may know. Anyway, Japan took Manchuria from China. China appealed to the League of Nations. The League of Nations sent Japan a letter of protest and did nothing else. Now, today, fast forward to 2014, at least when some nation tries to take over another, we at least put economic sanctions on that country, say we're not going to trade with you, or we're going to trade on a restricted level. But in those days, we did not even do that much. The result was Japan, Italy were able to take these countries. I'm giving that as a backdrop because these events happened before what I'm about to talk about. It's on page 733. Germany might have felt much encouraged by, hey, these democracies are all talk and no action, they won't do anything. So Germany first turned toward Austria. Hitler was an Austrian by birth. So Hitler moved into Austria and said that a lot of Germans living in Austria were being oppressed by the Austrians. This probably was not true. I mean, it might have been true in a few instances. You can't say anybody's perfect, but he used that as a flimsy excuse to invade Austria. Austria gave up without a shot. Again, the rest of the world sat by and did nothing. Now, I always tell this story about this time. Have any of you seen the play or seen it on television or know the story, The Sound of Music? There's several hands are going up. Yeah, Sound of Music is a true story. Based on this event right here, there was an Austrian nobleman who had been a hero in World War I, and he decided he was not going to side with the Nazis, so he slipped his family into Switzerland. And then from Switzerland they went to Canada, and their descendants are still living in Canada this day, as best as I understand. Again, actually happened right at the time Hitler had taken over Austria. Now Hitler was more confident than ever. He had built up the army. The Treaty of Versailles that had ended the war was now completely bonkers, over with. Hitler had exceeded the number of ships he was allowed, exceeded the number of planes he was allowed, the number of tanks, the number of heavy artillery in the side of his army. Germany was now once again a world power with a huge army, a vast number of tanks and a vast number of planes. And the Treaty of Versailles was all but scrapped. Hitler then joined forces with Mussolini. Then he signed a treaty with the Soviet Union called the Non-Aggression Pact. Hitler and Stalin agreed that they would not attack each other. In other words, they sat down and Hitler promised, "I'll never attack you, Stalin," and Stalin promised Hitler, "I'll never attack you." Now, of all the treaties that Hitler made, the only one he ever kept was his treaty with Mussolini. All of his others he broke. The treaties were not worth the paper they were written on. Well, about this time, Spain had a revolution, and Hitler and Mussolini sent aid to Franco of Spain. And the British and French were hoping that the democracy would win out in Spain, and it's believed the democracy would easily have won in Spain, except that no democracy came to the Spanish help. Instead, Hitler and Mussolini sent troops to aid Franco, and with the help of Hitler and Mussolini, Franco was able to win, and Franco was to govern Spain until 1976. However, it didn't help Hitler much because Spain refused to get involved in World War II. Franco told Hitler, hey, Spain just simply cannot fight a modern war against modern countries, and he refused to get involved. And as for Britain, they said, let Mussolini side with Hitler, because Mussolini will be a better player on Hitler's side. He'll do more good. He'll do us more good. He'll do England and France more good if he's on Hitler's side, and he'll do if he's on our side. And this proved to be very, very true. Mussolini contributed a whole lot to losing the war for Adolf Hitler, as we'll see in a little bit. Well, Hitler now has Austria. Then he next moved on Czechoslovakia. He took Czechoslovakia, you might say a third of it at a time. Oops, I've misspelled that word badly. C-Z-E-C-H. Took it in 3 chunks. First one, then a few months later he took the second part, and then finally he took the last part. And by this time, the other nations of the world were becoming concerned. Oh yes, by the way, the treaty Hitler signed with Mussolini, they called the Axis, comparing it to a wheel and an axle, the axle being the center part of the wheel. They called this the Axis treaty. They said, we're in the middle, Italy and Germany, and we're surrounded on all sides by our enemies, by outsiders who are, for the most part, our enemies. And that's why in World War II, Germany and Italy were called Axis powers. And their enemies were called the Allies. Well, Hitler was convinced that Britain and France would not use force to aid Czechoslovakia. He was right. Now, essentially, if Britain and France were telling Hitler, now, hey, now listen, Mr. Hitler, if you do this to me again, I'll go to war. And then they back up a step. Now, I'm not going to back up anymore. You do this to me again, I'll go to war next time. Well, I didn't go to war, but I'll go to war next time. And they kept backing up, said, next time you do this, I will go to war. Well, Hitler finally backed him into a corner, and they finally, as we'll see, did go to war. But and when they went to war with Hitler, they wound up wishing they had gone sooner. Hitler himself was to admit later that if the Allies had moved in when he took over Austria, and even if they had moved in when he first took over Czechoslovakia, Hitler would not have had a chance to win. Hitler was not quite ready. And as for Mussolini begged Hitler, said, Mr. Hitler, please, I can't have Italy ready for a war until 1943. Hitler said, well, hey, I'm moving ahead. I don't have that long, and I can't wait on you. So Hitler moved ahead with his war plans and dragged Mussolini in with him. Now, after Hitler had taken Czechoslovakia, and folk, this is something I want you to remember because any one of us might have done the same thing. The British had a prime minister named Chamberlain. Neville Chamberlain. He goes down in history as one of the biggest fools who ever governed a major country. However, let me hasten to state, he actually was known as a brilliant man, and he did what he could to prevent the war. He made a call, I don't know if he wrote a letter or made a phone call, but he personally said, Mr. Hitler, I'd like to sit down in a conference with you and talk to you, me and the other major leaders of Europe, and Hitler agreed. But Hitler did not move the conference to make it easier on Chamberlain. He made Chamberlain come all the way to him. And the President of France, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain, Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, and maybe a few other leaders all sat down. And Hitler promised Chamberlain that I have taken all the territory I want. I seek no more territory. I'm content with what I have. Neville Chamberlain believed it. And Neville Chamberlain got off an airplane waving a piece of paper. I mean, waving the treaty. It was not even worth the paper it was written on. And as he got off the plane, he told the people of Britain, with this, I have guaranteed peace in our time. I've spoken with Mr. Hitler, and I'm convinced Hitler and I are committed to peace, and we have made a promise that our nations will never go to war against each other. And folk, within about 2 or 3 days after Neville Chamberlain landed, Adolf Hitler invaded Poland. He knew all along, even as he signed a treaty, he had these plans to invade Poland. I mean, Hitler was one to spend his time and all the thinking and planning. And he had planned it all along. Again, Neville Chamberlain is made to look like a complete. Now, from time to time, folks, you'll hear references to Chamberlain. We talk about him every time there's an international crisis. Appeasement. Chamberlain became famous for the term appeasement. Give the bad guy what he wants and he'll quit. Yeah, now I need to wash my mouth out having said that. Give the bad guy everything he wants, and after a while he'll quit asking for more. Yeah. Now where's the soap? Anyways. Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, and this time Britain and France said, all right, we've had enough, you've dishonored your treaty, and they declared war, and World War II had begun.